Greetings aspirants, welcome to Narayana IAS. Wishing you all a very happy new year and also wishing a life full of love and of very gentle nature as recommended by Buddha. We will delve into today's daily news analysis. We have picked up certain important articles from Hindu as well as Indian Express. The first such article that we will be discussing is this widening war as has been published in the Hindu page number 6. It's about the widening regional conflict within this Red Sea region. Second article is about the Exposat in orbit to study black holes, neutron stars as published in the Hindu page number 1 again, which is being hailed as a further leap of ISRO into the space exploration. The third article that we have picked up is this GST revenue growth dipping to a 3-month low in the month of December, and this has been published again in the Hindu page number 1. Fourth one, no longer looking at import duties as revenue source in FTA negotiations, which is in fact a U-turn in terms of the India's approach towards the free trade negotiations, which has appeared in Indian Express page number 11. And fifth, after Centre's clarification letter, Hattees as a community in Himachal Pradesh has got the ST tag, which is again from the Hindu page number 3. We'll move to the first article. Moving to the first article, we'll look at this article published in the Hindu, titled as Widening War. This article is important from the perspective of geography from the preliminary point of view, and also it is important for mains from the perspective that there are certain policies and there is certain involvement of politics over this region of Red Sea, which is having impact on Indian diaspora as well as Indian economy. It is in this context we will look at this particular topic. There is a previous question over South China Sea, which had such regional ramifications, because of which this appeared in the examination. With respect to the South China Sea, maritime territorial disputes and rise in tension affect the need for safeguarding maritime security to ensure freedom of navigation and ever flight throughout the region. In this particular context, discuss the bilateral issues between India and China. Similarly, there can be a question on the bilateral relations between India, Saudi Arabia, or India, Egypt, or India specifically with regard to the Arab League. Having looked at the previous question, we should look at the context in which we are discussing this issue. Recently, we know that the American Navy has struck the Houthi militants in this region of Red Sea, killing nearly 10 militants, and this has in fact raised furore in the international community, saying that this might lead to increasing and enhancing this particular Israel-Palestine conflict into a major regional conflict. It is in this context we are looking at this issue. What are those factors apart from just the Israel-Palestine conflict which might lead to the emancipation or the enhancement of this particular conflict into a regional conflict? There are basic involvement of two important factors. One, there are certain local factors which are involved, and two, there are certain international factors which are involved. In order to understand both of these, we should know the basic geography related to this part of the region. If you recall that this American Navy could attack Houthi militants and their vessels within the Red Sea region, look at this particular second map, in which you see that there is a region within this Red Sea which is darker. This darker region within Red Sea shows you a narrow region within Red Sea where the water levels are high, the deep depth of the water is high, and hence the possibility of having or carrying the containers which are carrying or which have the more carrying capacity could flow through this particular tract. It is this which made Houthi rebels to target this region, even though it's a narrow region, and much more specifically it could target the containers. Similarly, even from the security point of view, when you see that American Navy could hit these Houthi rebels, they could hit them because they were within these waters. Now, what does this particular region represent? We have to look at the basic geography. We know that the Earth has what is referred to as continental crust. If you see the vertical classification of the Earth's surface, and this continental crust, as we know, is in the form of certain plates. and we know that these plates are referred to as continental plates. And these plates are subjected to a very subtle movement over longer periods of time, and this movement is referred to as plate tectonics. So this is subjected to lot of dynamic activity. Either this movement can be convergent amongst the tectonic plates or the divergent. Accordingly, you have divergent plate tectonics and the convergent plate tectonics. What you are seeing here is a very peculiar nature of divergent plate tectonics. In this part of the region, the continental shield, hitherto the region which was actually stable, is getting separate. It is getting divergent. It is this divergence which is leading to the creation of what is called as rift. This extends even to this region of what is referred to as Great African Rift Valley. And this region is very resource rich. This region is also rich in terms of ecology. This Great Rift Valley, as you see, is occurring because of the divergent movement between what is referred to as Arabian plate, the divergent movement between the American plate and the African plate. All these three plates are diverging in this particular region of continental shield, which was hitherto a continental shield, and forming this particular rift valley. And whenever this rift valley is formed, the Indian Ocean is filling up this particular region. As the depths are increasing, the water levels are also having more deeper and deeper. And this aspect of rift valley, when you see that there is higher volume of water which is present, is the region where higher amount of transport and communication is occurring. This is the basic geography of this region. And it is said that it is this basic geography which has conspired along with politics to create these regional tensions in this region. Second aspect, as we have seen the basic geography, if you look at the political nature of this part of the region, you see that this region of Red Sea is engulfed by a number of political actors, which are the specific nation states. There are 9 such specific nation states, including Israel. As you see, Saudi Arabia is a major player, Egypt is a major player, Sudan is a major player, Yemen is a major player, Djibouti, Somalia, Eritrea, and here you see that even the Jordan and Israel. Both Jordan and Israel, they have their mouths opening into the Red Sea. It is these nations which are part of the geopolitics of this region. Along with this, we must not forget that even Ethiopia is also part of the geopolitics of this region straight away, directly but not indirectly, because of the fact that the Eritrea as a region has been separated from Ethiopia. Earlier, Ethiopia also had their opening into the Red Sea. So this is constituting the geopolitical situation in the form of these nations which have their access to the Red Sea region. This is the first aspect. The second aspect is, having known this particular regional polity, we have to look at what are those factors which are actually constituting the instability in this region. One such particular aspect is that most of the nations, as you see in this, are having lot of political instability. Either they are marked by the civil wars or they are marked by the security situation from the perspective of terrorism. Striking this region is major factor which is leading to a regional crisis one after the other in this part of the region. For example, take the case of what is referred to as terrorism. You know that Egypt alongside even Kenya are subjected to terrorism from this organization called Al-Shabaab. This Al-Shabaab as a militant organization, terrorist organization, as it has been recognized, is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, and the significance of this terrorist organization can be known only when you understand that nearly 27% of the region in Egypt is influenced by this particular terrorist organization. On the other hand, Egypt also has what is referred to as Sinai Peninsula. This Sinai Peninsula is again another region which is marked by activities of Islamic State. In short, we refer to it as ISIS. On the other hand, as you see in Sudan, in Yemen, and also in Ethiopia, you have the possibilities of various terror groups which are causing insecurity to this particular region and causing instability to the established political rulers in this part of the nations. For example, in Yemen, as you already know, is facing a situation in which Houthi rebels have nearly occupied most of the nation. For example, the capital Sana'a is under their control. Similarly, this port of Hattees, which is again under their control, largely controlling the political space of this particular nation called Yemen. And we know that this Yemen Houthi rebels are backed by Iran, given the fact that they also profess the similar kind of religious culture. This involvement of extraterritorial players into this region is also causing more and more instability. Similarly, the government in Yemen is supported by the Saudi Arabia, and it is trying to restore the erstwhile government. As we already know, much of the territory in Yemen is controlled by this terror group led by the Houthi rebels. On the other hand, we also have a situation wherein this political instability is also caused by the land boundary disputes that some of these nations have. For example, Eritrea, since 1952, had been an autonomous region within Ethiopia. However, felt that they have been discriminated against and they have been alienated from the larger political space of Ethiopia, and hence they have launched a armed rebellion against the government, and this has led to a major civil war within Ethiopia. We know that in 90s, the Eritrea could get separated from Ethiopia and they have proclaimed their own national independence. Otherwise, earlier, Ethiopia had access to the Red Sea region. Now, Ethiopia, because of this emerging situation, do not have access to Red Sea region. The conflict between Eritrea and Ethiopia had been a consistent issue, and this has time and again led to a situation of war, conflict in this part of the region. Now, as you see that this situation emerges, recently there was a peace agreement in Oslo between Ethiopia and Eritrea. After this peace agreement, by and large, the cooperation between these two nations has been established. However, this might have lived a short life wherein there is a particular region called Tigray region within the Ethiopia, and this Tigray region is marked by another armed rebel. Hitherto, it was supported by Eritrea. Now, after this peaceful agreement that has been signed, Eritrea even has supported the efforts of Ethiopia against this so-called Tigray Liberation Force. In this, as you see the cooperation, and this cooperation started getting diluted very recently. And this clearly signifies the fact that the peace in this part of the region is very, very fluid. On the other hand, there is another aspect that we have to also keep in mind. Whether it is Sudan or Yemen or Somalia, where these terrorist activities are larger, they are referred to as terror triangle. The significance of this terror triangle is that they control the very, very significant sea lanes of communications in this part of the region. As you see here, Yemen is controlling this region of Bab el-Mandeb. It is also opening into the Gulf of Aden, and the Somalia is controlling large chunk of this Gulf of Aden as a region. And as you see, Sudan is having her opening into the Red Sea. This terror triangle is not just posing a challenge in one part of the region, but it is posing a challenge in the entire region of Red Sea that is opening into the Gulf of Aden. And keep in mind that Suez Canal opening into Red Sea, getting her consignments from the Europe, are connecting even the Asia and Europe through these particular channels, signifies what is the importance of addressing this issue of terror triangle in this part of the region. Third, there is greater and greater militarization that is happening. When Djibouti was going through her own crisis within the nation state, French military has stepped in, it tried to provide the security support. On the other hand, it was felt that the European powers are unilaterally getting involved into the domestic politics. This has led to the continuous security and militarization of this part of the region. Second, if you recall, USA has her largest naval base in this part of the region, representing the interest of all these particular nations. On the other hand, even China is trying to set up her military base and the naval base in this part of the region, which is indicating the emerging Cold War scenario in this region of Red Sea. Third, we also see that the increasing militarization is also from the perspective of involvement of nuclearization. Egypt is involved in nuclearizing herself in the sense that it wants to set up nuclear power plants, and there are fears over the region of at the government of Egypt that this might lead to the emergence of another nuclear state in this part of the region. More importantly, Egypt having a extremist organization in the form of Muslim Brotherhood is also posing a challenge in this part of the region. On the other hand, as you already know, this part of the region is significant from the perspective of trade, migration, and also the flow of capital. How? We'll see in the next slide. As you see in this, if I take into consideration just one particular commodity called as crude oil and petroleum products, you look at the origin nations. The movement of these petroleum products and crude oil through Red Sea and then to the Suez Canal is having these volumes. As it shows, it is showing a trade in terms of volume which is at 5 million barrels per day. And all these nations are origin nations. Not only from the world perspective, but also from the Indian perspective, if you look at it, much of the oil is being traded by India and also from Saudi Arabia. This signifies the importance of this particular region, which is significant from the fact that energy security is catered to by this part of the region called Red Sea. Second, apart from that, if you look at the destination countries, Europe is the major destination region in terms of such trade, and this Europe, on the other hand, for all these crude oil requirements is largely dependent on the consigns from India. So even from this perspective, this region is significant. Also, we also see that if there is any consignment which is coming towards the south, again it has to use the same route of Suez Canal and then the region of Red Sea and also even the Gulf of Aden. Even in this perspective, if you look at much of this particular trade is occurring from Russia, and we have to keep in mind that large chunk of this trade from Russia with respect to crude oil has been inbound towards India, and this again signifies the importance of this. Moreover, if you look at the destination countries of southbound crude oil and petroleum product volumes transiting the Suez Canal, out of all this entire trade, if you see that India is receiving a large chunk of these volumes. This speaks a lot about the economic significance of this region, not only for the world, but also even for India specifically. Number two, it is also important from the perspective of diaspora. For example, if you go back to the slide here, Yemen has a lot of Indian diaspora, and in 2015 when Houthi rebels revolted against the incumbent government and wanted to establish their political rule, Indian government wanted to halt this particular war for few days such that the diaspora can be catered to with respect to their need of getting relocated into India. India has conducted what is referred to as Operation Ahad in order to provide this relief to the Indian diaspora in Yemen. This Indian diaspora is catering to lot of business, corporate and employment requirements in Yemen, and this is largely true even with respect to Saudi Arabia. This is true with respect to even Egypt. Given this region constitutes lot of significance for India. In order to make sure that peace is back in this part of the region, we clearly know that the conflict which has led to the death of more than 22,000 people, particularly in Palestine, is the one which has to be addressed to. The peace efforts must now halt the war, because of which alone there will be some restoration of security in this part of the region. Number one. Number two, this effort of addressing peace in this part of the region must not only be limited to the Israel-Palestine conflict, but this must extend to the various other conflicts and the instability that is there within this part of the region. Number three, we must keep in mind that out of all these 9 nations, 7 nations are part of this regional grouping referred to as Arab League. This Arab League is largely led by Saudi Arabia, this holds significant for India in order to have an enhanced role. We must also recall that after many years of hiatus, recently Arab League also had her summit level conference, and given this and given the fact that India had healthy relations with most of the Arab League nations, India's effort towards reconciliation in this part of the region can be pronounced. Second, we also know that this region of Red Sea is subjected to influence by China through her what is referred to as BRI initiative, wherein not only from the perspective of militarization, but also from the perspective of trade and commerce, China wants to integrate this part of the region into larger network that it is trying to establish. Even from this perspective, reconciliation efforts are mandatory. Number 3, apart from this, India's role can also be bilateral in this region, given the fact that India's involvement and influence in the region of Sudan, in the region of Egypt, in the region of Saudi Arabia has been pronounced. This can lead to the favorable condition for the entire region in order to restore peace immediately. Moreover, as there is involvement of sub-regional polities and international politics in this part of the region, for example, as we have already seen, involvement of China, involvement of Iran, involvement of USA, involvement of Russia, is complicating the situation in this part of the region. The first step, as we already know, is to stop the conflict and to make sure that there is way towards peaceful negotiations. On the other hand, the second step is to make sure that the prolonged peaceful negotiations are addressing not just the Israel-Palestine conflict, but also various other challenges which are faced by this part of the region. This is good not only from the world peace point of view, but also from the Indian context, both for diaspora and also for the Indian economy. Moving to the next article, we'll discuss this placing of Exposat in orbit. We know that this mission is important, as stated by the chairman of ISRO, for us to move towards the Gaganyaan mission. This is to study the black holes, neutron stars and other such sources which emit what is referred to as polarized X-rays. Look at this previous question. With reference to AstroSat, the astronomical observatory launched by India, which of the following statements are correct? Other than USA and Russia, India is the only country to have launched a similar observatory into space. And 2, AstroSat is a 2000 kg satellite placed in an orbit at 1650 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. Select the correct answer using the code given below. As you see this question, similar question may also be possible from the coming examinations on the basis of this particular mission alone. We know that the ISRO has successfully launched this Exposat mission, and remember that India is the second such nation to send a polarized X-ray observatory to study astronomical sources such as black holes, neutron stars and many such other astronomical sources. We know that the Big Bang theory is the one which, to the extent possible, satisfactorily explain the evolution of the universe. And in this evolution of the universe, as we know, the star formation is one significant phenomenon. And the stars which have formed ultimately will have their own death, and this death is what referred to as the supernova explosion. And these explosions will lead to either formation of black holes or the neutron stars. And these are the sources, as we are seeing, are emitting these polarized X-rays. What are the black holes? As you know, black hole is a region within the space-time dimension, the three-dimensional space-time dimension, where they have intense gravitational forces and also extreme density. Second, neutron stars are the ones which also again emerge from the supernova explosion, and these are the massive stars which have depleted their nuclear fuel and hence do not have the ability to uphold the outer layers against the forces of gravity. These are the possibilities when we know that the star formation and its death is crossing a particular limit in terms of accumulating the matter or accreting the matter, and this is referred to as Chandrasekhar's limit. Chandrasekhar's limit. If the mass of that particular star is crossing the mass of the sun and way beyond 1.44 times the mass of the sun, then the possibility of neutron star, and its occurrence emerges post this supernova explosion. Having seen the sources of these polarized X-rays, we will see what this polarization of X-ray is. We know that X-ray is invisible form of light within the spectrum of light, and this invisible form of light is having high frequency. High frequency indicates the presence of high energy, and any such high energy source will have the what is called as the photoelectric effect as identified by the Einstein, and in this we know that it comprises of the electric waves and magnetic waves, and these are constantly in motion when you see this wave-like motion occurring, and these waves being sinusoidal. I repeat, these waves being sinusoidal, they do not follow any particular pattern of motion. Whereas when you see a polarized X-ray, what happens here is, rather than being a sinusoidal wave which is not organized, you see here that it is an organized wave, and both of these waves, that is the magnetic field and the electric field, are vibrating in the same direction rather than in the perpendicular direction. So when magnetars or black holes which emit X-rays, what happens is they encounter a wide variety of materials in the universe, and this leads to the occurrence of this phenomena called polarization of X-rays. So as X-rays pass through this thick cloud of materials, the electric component of the X-ray emits a photon in a changed direction as it has now undergone what is referred to as scattering. This is with reference to the polarization of X-rays. What about this X-ray polarimeter satellite? This X-ray polarimeter satellite has two particular payloads. One is referred to as Pollux and the other one is referred to as Expect. This is the maiden mission of India, which is analyzing this polarization of X-rays emanating from very diverse celestial bodies such as we have already seen, black holes and neutron stars. So this operates in a low Earth orbit at an altitude of 650 kilometers with an inclination of 6 degrees. And remember that this has a lifetime of 5 years, and whatever the observations that do, these observations occur when they are in transit through the Earth's shadow, for instance, during the eclipse period. Having seen this, we shall look at the significance of this particular mission. The first significance is that this is going to demonstrate the ability of the ISRO in terms of technological capabilities. As we have already seen, XPOSAT is the second X-ray polarimetry mission globally. Second, this is followed by the launch of ISPE in 2021 by NASA. Apart from this, there are possibilities of better insights in X-rays generating celestial bodies, and these insights will be available through whatever the studies that XPOSAT is going to do. And these studies would observe two kinds of sources of X-rays. One is referred to as persistent sources, wherein we know clearly that these sources are targeted sources and very well known sources. And two, there are certain sources which are referred to as transient sources. The sources such as pulsars or any active galactic nuclei or magnetars within this evolution of Big Bang or the universe. Within the evolution of this universe, which is explained by the Big Bang, these can also be studied as part of these XPOSAT studies. Moreover, when you look at the X-ray polarizing processes and the causes which are leading to it, remember that as we know, polarized X-rays are emanating from these sources and they can produce insights about the nature of the radiations and also multitude of processes which are involved in the generation of these radiations, which in fact give us more deeper insights in the how this universe has evolved and specifically what is the significance of these astronomical sources in this entire universe and its evolution. And last one such significance we have is that it gives us not only the evolution of the universe and specifically about the evolution of these celestial bodies. So the study of degree and the angle of polarization of X-ray photons along with various spectrographic information and imaging data that we receive will definitely unravel the mysteries of the universe with regard to our evolution. This is the explanation the pictorial or graphical explanation that we can have with regard to polarization of X-ray. As you see that the magnetic field and the electrical field having these different directions, the polarizer will make it possible that they will have vibration in a uniform manner, in a unified direction. This is what the polarization as an aspect with respect to the concept of light is. In conclusion, we can conclude that the XPOSAT will prove India's mettle in global space research by providing a better understanding of the celestial bodies. Moreover, it will also improve India's stature as a scientific superpower, increasing its international role as a soft power. Apart from this, this can also provide us newer commercial opportunities, particularly from the global south point of view. Moving to the next article, we'll see this issue of GST revenue growth, wherein the government has said that there is a dip in terms of this revenue growth in an year-on-year comparison and also a monthly based comparison. Look at this previous year question. Enumerate the indirect taxes which have been subsumed in the goods and services tax in India. Also, comment on the revenue implications of the GST introduced in India since July 2017. This has been asked in 2019, and by and large, number of times this GST had been a focal area by the UPSC. As you see in this context, the revenue generated through GST in this month of December has crossed 1,64,800 crores, and which is 1.8% lower than the amount collected in November. What is the significance of this issue? Before that, we will see the basic definition related to GST, and it is clear that GST is a supply-based tax, and at the same time, it is also referred to as a destination-based tax. The supply begins from the production firm to the extent of the ultimate consumer. So this entire process of production and distribution, whatever is involved, this is part of this entire supply chain. GST is imposed upon this entire supply chain of goods and services, and at the end, the destination point is what the one which actually pays this entire tax. Hence, it is also referred to as destination-based indirect tax. Second, the GST as a reform has been brought in as part of a number of initial reforms which have been implemented in the form of either MODVAT or SINVAT, which is referred to as Central Value Added Tax. It is to simplify the tax structure, wherein the simplification of tax structure involves what is referred to as reducing the cascading effect, by which it means that if I am buying a particular soap at 40 rupees, then we know that this 40 rupees is inclusive of various taxes. And all these taxes are indirect taxes. Suppose if there is involvement of some raw material in the form of milk in manufacturing this particular soap, then the producer would have already paid the indirect tax, and this indirect tax might have also been included within this 40 rupees. So whatever the tax that he has paid, which is already there in this particular price, and when I am buying it, I am now paying the same tax again. This is what is referred to as duplication of tax, or this is also referred to as cascading effect. Because on the same tax that the manufacturer has paid, as this is part of this maximum retail price, the tax that I am paying as part of this particular price involves even the tax on the tax. So the cascading effect is in fact tax on tax. It is this that we want to avoid through this particular taxation. So what GST does is it taxes only the value addition in the entire supply chain. This is the significant change that we brought in through this GST implementation. And moreover, as you implement this with the involvement of simplified procedure, on the other hand, addressing this issue of cascading effect, this creates a condition for ease of doing business, and also this creates a unified national market because of this. It is this basically we have as part of conceptual understanding. On the other hand, as you see, there are certain fundamental features that you see with regard to the goods and services tax. As this unifies Indian market into one single entity. This is held as part of one nation, one tax regime that the government was trying to bring in. On the other hand, with respect to direct tax code, there are multiple concerns in bringing in what is referred to as one nation, one tax. But with respect to the indirect taxation, GST has provided that particular leverage. Second, it involves what is referred to as dual structure, by which it means that there is a component with regard to states, because number of state taxes have been subsumed into it, and there is a component for the center also, because even the central taxes, which are indirect taxes, have also been subsumed into this one single entity called GST. So this is referred to as SGST and this is referred to as CGST. And whenever there is cross-border trade between the states, then this is being referred to as IGST, integrated GST. In value terms, it is equivalent of both SGST plus CGST. This is the dual structure that you have pertaining to GST. Third, as we have already seen, this is the destination-based tax. Whichever is the end consumer, that person or that entity is going to pay this entire tax. Fourth, there will be multiple tax slabs, as you know. There are certain tax slabs such as 5% or 12%, 18%. This refers to the multiple slab tax structure that it has. Fifth, this calls for what is referred to as input tax credit. As we have seen earlier, in order to remove the cascading effect, what it does is it provides this mechanism of input tax credit. A particular manufacturer has manufactured the soap and now it is going to the distributor, and from distributor to end consumer. In this, the manufacturer might have already paid certain tax on the basis of whatever the indirect taxation that has been imposed. Let me assume that the manufacturing cost has been 40 rupees and then 10% of tax has been laid upon it. So this makes it extra 4 rupees and hence at the factory gate it is costing at around 44 rupees. Now when it goes to the end consumer, let us assume that it is being sold at 50 rupees. What the input tax credit does is the manufacturer in fact doesn't pay any tax. However, this particular amount is calculated. It is shown as if he has paid the tax, and after adding this particular taxation on the basis of whatever the value addition that the manufacturer has done, this goes to the distributor and then to the end consumer. By the time it goes to the end consumer, the distributor profit, whatever has been included, let's assume 2 rupees or 3 rupees, on this there will be additional tax, and inclusion of this particular tax, the end consumer would be buying this particular commodity. In case as the end consumer is paying even the tax amount that the manufacturer has made, this amount will be refunded to the manufacturer. This destination based tax means this input tax credit mechanism will remove the cascading effect by making it a burden on the end consumer who is purchasing this particular commodity in the entire supply chain. This is the nature of the input tax credit. On the other hand, online filing and compliance has made it a simplified procedure. Moreover, there is a threshold which has been defined for certain particular sectors, and with respect to that threshold, there are certain exemptions which are provided. And these exemptions can also be extended to many other sectors as part of decision made by the GST Council, which governs the goods and services tax. Having seen the key features, we'll move to the trends which are seen with respect to this revenue growth, particularly the state-wise growth trends. As you see that there are states which have recorded a growth of more than 13% or more. These 13 states have been performing well with regard to GST revenue collections consistently. Second, the leading states, as you see, are Arunachal Pradesh, Haryana, Goa, Jammu and Kashmir and Tamil Nadu. This order seems to be important from the examination point of view. Please keep that in mind. And there are 13 states which have recorded a growth below the national average. Particularly Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh, as you see, they have recorded a mere growth of 1%, and Gujarat at 7%, Madhya Pradesh at 11%, Kerala and Uttar Pradesh at 12%. Both Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh can be considered as significant from the examination point of view. Now, when you see these trends with respect to revenue growth for the respective states, remember that one of the high frequency indicators for the measurement of underdevelopment or the slow economic growth in a particular state is the development distance, and this development distance will have the tax collections also as one indicator on the basis of which we demark whether a particular state is developing or not. And there is also one more fact that we have to keep in mind. On an average, this represents a 12% increase, as you know, from whatever the average that we used to have earlier, which was at 1.49 lakh crore. This is something that is very important in terms of pattern. And moreover, for last 7 months, we see that the revenue collections have exceeded this 1.6 lakh crore. This indicates that there is increase in the tax base, as you see here, increase in the tax base in terms of number. And number two, the long-term trend growth that you see consistently since the end of the pandemic is clearly being consistently occurring in Indian economy. It is this which in fact has led to increased collections for last 7 months more than whatever the earlier average that we had. As you see in this particular chart, the trend in the GST collection can clearly show that the growth in comparison with the previous month has always and consistently been higher and higher. This is one pattern that we have to again keep in mind. I repeat, compared to each and every month in 2022-2023 financial year, in 2023-2024 financial year, the GST revenue growth had been consistently higher in comparison with the previous months in the previous financial year. However, we have two fundamental concerns with regard to the GST growth. First one pertains to the states which are resource rich but do not have any substantial presence of manufacturing industry, wherein the GST being the destination based tax, much of the resources which have been mined in these states, for example Jharkhand, are going to other states, and these states benefiting these resources are paying these particular taxes. So the states which are resource rich, they claim that we are losing out our revenue because of the lack of industrial presence. This is the first concern. Second concern is that the input tax credit mechanism, I repeat, the input tax credit mechanism, even though functioning very well, as we see in the current scenario, large chunk of money is lying idle within this particular mechanism pertaining to the emerging GST related disputes and the presence of what is referred to as many litigations in the tribunals, GST tribunals. These are the two important concerns that we see as a pattern emerging with respect to GST revenue growth. Moving to the next, we'll discuss this article on free trade negotiation from Indian side. Look at this previous year question. The aim of information technology agreements is to lower all taxes and tariffs on information technology products by signatories to zero. What impact would such agreements have on Indian interests? Given this question, and given the fact that we are negotiating with various nations and regional groupings in order to lower the tariffs, this can be a possible area for question in the mains, not just in prelims. What is the context that is bringing this issue to the fore? We know that India is negotiating free trade agreements with various nation states or economies and also various regional groupings. However, these particular negotiations have been very prolonged. This has been a concern. This has been a concern from multiple scenarios. One such scenario that we can discuss is this. If you look at the 2015-2016 economic survey, it presents that since 2010, there is an exponential growth in trade volume between India and the economies with which India has the free trade agreement. I repeat, since 2010, there has been an exponential increase in the trade volume between India and the economies with which the India has signed the free trade agreement. On the other hand, if you look at the trade volume with those nations with whom we do not have any free trade agreement, it has increased. However, it has increased at a very slower pace. This is to establish the fact that free trade agreements across the world in this era of globalization has helped the economies to grow further and further through this possibility of both exports and imports. Second, we also have seen another scenario post-Brexit in 2016, which means that Britain has come out of the European Union, which is not just a customs union but also an economic union and political union. What we have seen is a jolt to these globalization efforts. Emergence of Donald Trump into the political scene in USA has further given a jolt to this process of globalization. So since 2016, it is estimated that globe is moving towards slow pace of globalization, or few thinkers have said that this is an era of decline in globalization. Accordingly, what you have seen since 2015-2016 is a slowdown in the India's exports, even with the economies with whom we have free trade agreements. And given the pandemic situation in 2020-2021, this has been given a further jolt. However, since 2021-2022 financial year, India has again revived her growth in the trade volumes between all those economies which have trade agreements. It is in this particular context, this particular article is important. In order to address this idea of prolonged free trade negotiations which are getting delayed, India is stepping up her efforts towards arriving at some reconciliation. However, we have to keep in mind the basic conceptual framework while negotiating any free trade. Keep in mind that it is liberalization and globalization which are the prime drivers or processes which have increased the volume and value of trade across the globe. Liberalization involves the easing of regulatory norms. Liberalization involves participation of more and more players freely, either from the private sector or public sector, into the activity of economy, either in terms of production or consumption. On the other hand, globalization involves the blurring of the national boundaries for the purposes of economy, such that there is free flow of trade, free flow of goods, free flow of capital, and also free flow of people in the form of migration. Both of these processes have led to the scenario that we are seeing today, wherein there was an increased growth that the globe has seen, or rather economic growth that the global economy has seen. On the other hand, it is the same process which has also been criticized across the globe for whatever the inadequacies and distortions that it has shown. Free trade, as it denotes, implies that there is this principle of non-discrimination. Implementation of this principle of non-discrimination is what the institution or the global institution which governs the free trade across the globe recommends, which is World Trade Organization. What is this non-discrimination? Whatever the goods that services which are produced in a particular domestic economy must not have any kind of prejudice or any kind of restriction towards or discrimination towards any goods and services which flow towards her domestic economy from a competitor. This non-discrimination as a principle has been included on the part of WTO agreements, whether it is general agreement on trade in services or general agreement on trade and tariffs, which is trade in goods. The above one is the trade in services. Both of these have this non-discriminatory clause in their provisions. This non-discriminatory clause in their provisions has been there through one particular provision, which is referred to as most favored nation status. If I am attributing to free trade with respect to a particular commodity by removing all the tariff restrictions or quota restrictions that I might have, this must be available for all the economies across the globe. By having this, you have to provide for what is referred to as the status of most favored nation to all these economies. When you go for this free trade, this has been one mechanism that has been included in both GATT and the General Agreement on Trade in Services to implement this principle of non-discrimination. There is another principle which is there within these agreements. You have to give them a treatment of what is referred to as national treatment, which means that if a particular resident is migrating from one economy to another economy for the purpose of employment and in order to cater his skill in terms of service to that particular economy, for the purposes of such production, his presence has to be treated in terms of whatever the treatment that we might have towards our own nationals. Similarly, if there is a particular good which is arriving towards Indian economy from, for example, Sri Lankan economy, then that particular good must also be treated on par with whatever the goods and services which are produced by Indian nationals within Indian economy. So both of these aspects of MFN status and national treatment cater to this requirement of non-discrimination as a principle. So when we are trying to negotiate with these economies, for example, UK or EU or Oman, the primary focus had been on this clause of non-discrimination when we negotiate on behalf of particularly those vulnerable groups which are involved in the production process. For example, the farmers. Having understood this particular concept, we will move to what has to be done in order to make sure that these delays which are there within the free trade agreement, and also having understood the importance of free trade agreements in the evolution of the higher and higher economic growth in India, we will look at certain possibilities in order to address these delays. One is, we must have a framework whereby, guidelines whereby you are introducing what is referred to as predictability. While negotiating itself, there has to be a predictable nature in which the direction of the negotiation must move. On the other hand, once we have negotiated the agreement, then there might be certain terms and conditions in terms of what might be the possibility of trade restrictions or quota restrictions or import tariffs or export tariffs that can be imposed. And in this also, there has to be greater predictability. For example, take the case of onions. On the one hand, government said that the onion farmers must get remunerative price, and we know that they were getting remunerative price when they were exporting these onions. However, all of a sudden, when there was a price shock, government said there is no more possibility of exports given the fact that there is a supply constraint even within our domestic economy. This is a way of arbitrariness that you see in terms of policy. This is what must be addressed such that there is a predictability that is possible for both businesses and also the governments of other economies. Second, we must make sure that there is fair competition within this trade. For example, take the case of this RCEP. We did not sign this RCEP given the fact that it was going against the interests of particularly dairy farmers within India. The dairy production from various economies within this RCEP group, for example, Australia, is of cost effective because much of it has the involvement of mechanization, whereas there is a lot of involvement of labor when you look at dairy sector within Indian economy. It is the single factor which might kill the possibility of fair competition, and hence we said we will not sign this agreement. It is this fair competition which must be kept in mind in order to sign any particular free trade agreement. Even in these particular delays, one of the aspects which is delaying it is this issue of fair competition. Third, there also must be certain cautious approach that government has to follow. Given the fact that there is requirement of predictability, given the fact that there is requirement of fair competition, we must keep in mind that there is involvement of some of the very vulnerable groups in the production process within Indian economy. For example, Indian women, for example, the farmers who are producing based on certain basic aspects of organic farming. Both of these groups either have vulnerability from the perspective of price or from the perspective of the nature of the product. When a farmer is producing organically, we must keep in mind that as there is no involvement of any kind of chemical substance such as pesticide or fertilizer, what you see is the production levels have stagnated. The productivity is also low. And given this, the price that is involved with respect to these products are going to be high. How to address this riddle? Because much of these products are subjected to exports. On the other hand, when you are exporting this, the importers would say that the price of this commodity is high. Given the fact that the quality aspect has to be seen here rather than the quantity, the price has to be kept high such that the farmer ultimately benefits. It is this cautious approach with regard to the vulnerable sections of the society, keeping in mind their rights and the fair remuneration that they have to get. India must negotiate these free trade agreements. Moving to the next article, we'll look at this Hattees as a community getting scheduled tribe status in Himachal Pradesh. Look at this previous year question. In the areas covered under the Panchayat Extension to the Scheduled Areas Act 1996, what is the role or power of Gram Sabha? Asked in 2012. Gram Sabha has the power to prevent alienation of land in scheduled areas. Gram Sabha has the ownership of minor forest produce. And third statement says recommendation of Gram Sabha is required for granting prospecting license or mining lease for any mineral in the scheduled areas. Which of the statements given above are correct? As you already know, the context is with regard to this community of Hattees getting the status of being scheduled tribe in Himachal Pradesh. We'll now look at the procedure involved and the constitutional provisions governing this issue of granting scheduled tribe status to any particular community. As per the Constitution under Article 366, if you look at what is the definition that has been attributed to scheduled tribe, on the one hand, it did not define tribe at all. On the other hand, the scheduled tribe as it has been defined is referring to whatever the communities or tribal communities or tribes which are deemed under Article 342 of the Constitution to be considered as scheduled tribes. What does Article 342 actually lay down? Article 342 Clause 1 and Clause 2, it lays down the procedure. It lays down the procedure. What it says is that the office of president must consult the office of governor of any particular state or the lieutenant governor of any union territory, number one. And number two, after such consultation, which is not binding upon the office of president, the office of president comes up with a public notification notifying the communities or tribes which are being recognized or given the status of being a scheduled tribe. This is the procedure that has been given, attributing the office of president with this power of granting the status of scheduled tribe. On the other hand, under Clause 2, there is a provision which says that Parliament by law can amend this public notification wherein either inclusion or exclusion can be considered by the Parliament with her own discretion. This is another aspect that is included within the Article 342. As such, there is no specific definition of tribe except for this particular procedure that has been laid down. On the other hand, if you look at the criteria which are involved for granting such status, as this is absent within the Constitution, we had what is referred to as Lokur Committee in 1965, which has given a 5-point criteria which is still being followed while granting this status of being a scheduled tribe. First such particular criteria is indications of a primitive nature. Primitive on the one hand appears to be very racial here, but on the other hand, in order to characterize the characteristics which are away from the so-called mainstream community, they refer to it as indicators of the primitive traits. This is first particular criteria. Second one, they must have their own distinctive culture, wherein the culture had been passed on from one generation to another generation and it has its own defined space. Number three, they must also have this feature of geographical isolation, which means that they must specifically belong to a particular geographic location or their origin must be defined on the basis of that particular geographic location, and this geographic location has her own inseparable nature with whatever the distinctive culture that they have and the primitive traits that they exhibit. Fourth, there is also a kind of shyness that is involved with this particular community when they come into contact with the mainstream community. And fifth, this important aspect of defining the backwardness, wherein this backwardness will be defined on the basis of a report submitted by the National Commission on Scheduled Tribes. All these 5 factors must be considered when you grant the status of scheduled tribe to a particular community. As we have already seen, this is being followed on the basis of the recommendations made by Logur Committee in 1965. So whenever this procedure is to be involved, this is the criteria that we will consider. Now, administratively, if you look at this particular idea of granting scheduled tribe status to any community, what you see is that once this particular idea has come up, the scheduled tribe whose national commission would look into this issue and will consider whether they can be included in this list of scheduled tribes or not. One, and then this goes to the Registrar General of India, whether there is concurrence of even Registrar General of India with respect to this particular community is there or not is the first step. Second, once this happens, this goes to Ministry of Tribal Affairs, wherein it is this ministry which might have initiated this proposal on the basis of whatever the consultation, as we have already seen as part of constitutional provisions with the respective state or union territory that they have done. And then once this concurrence has been obtained, this will be considered by the cabinet, and if they approve, this goes to the office of president for their consent. As the office of president concedes it, then it will be issued in the form of a public notification, as we have already seen, giving the status of being a scheduled tribe. This particular administrative procedure is involved such that the states which are actually involved in this process of granting the status are in concurrence with the office of president. Relate to certain facts, what you see is more than 730 tribes have been notified till now as part of this Article 342 of the Constitution. Second, as part of the entire population, they constitute nearly 8.6% of the total population. Third, most importantly, more than 2/3 of the ST population, as you see, is concentrated in just 7 states, and most of them are in Madhya Pradesh. Moreover, there are 3 such regions where the notification of any particular community as part of scheduled tribe did not happen at all. Punjab, Haryana and the Delhi region. With this, 2 union territories, Puducherry and Chandigarh, also do not have any community which has been notified as the scheduled tribe as part of our population. Having completed the discussion over the articles, we will move to certain prelims and mains practice questions. Take this question. Consider the following statements regarding GST, the Goods and Services Tax. GST is a multi-stage, source-based indirect tax levied on the supply of goods and services in India, at least to this extent of whether it is source-based or destination-based. As we know that it is destination-based, hence this statement is incorrect. Second statement, GST trends show a continuous increase in the revenue collection till date post the pandemic era in 2020. This again is a wrong statement which is not true, and hence the answers have to be neither 1 nor 2. Move to the second question. Consider the following statements about recognition of scheduled tribes as per the constitutional provisions of India. The first statement is state government's consent is mandatory for extending ST status under Article 342 Clause 1, which is an incorrect statement, which is not mandatory. It is the President's discretionary power that we see under this particular provision. Second, Parliament has the power to modify the scheduled tribe list even after the presidential notification corresponding to its passage, which is true because the second clause of Article 342 states that Parliament has this particular power. And 3, a particular community recognized as a scheduled tribe in any state means that it is to be considered as a tribe throughout the tenure in the entire territory of India, which is again a false statement which is specific to that particular state alone. How many of the above statements mentioned above are correct? We know that only one statement, that is second statement, is correct, and hence the answer has to be A. Moving to the third question, consider the following statements. India is the third country across the world to launch a satellite for studying polarized X-rays, which is a false statement. We know that it's the second nation to do so. The second one is the satellite ExpoSat will revolve around Earth in a geostationary orbit of approximately 3,600 kilometers. We know that it's a false statement, which is a low Earth orbit in which it has been placed. Which of the statements given above are correct? We know that neither one nor two, and hence answer has to be D. Moving to the fourth question. Consider the following statements. The most favored nation status as a mechanism in GATT, that is General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, would ensure trade without discrimination in global trade, which is a correct statement. Second, India has the highest import duty compared to most of the major economies with an average most favored nation rate of 18%, about twice the global average according to WTO. What it means is the current tariffs that Indian economy has in comparison with whatever the nations or economies to which we have granted this most favored nation tag, we have the highest rate of 18% amongst all the peers. This is what it says, and which is a right statement. Which of the above statements are correct? One only, two only, both of the above, and none of the above. Answer has to be both of the above. Having done with this, we move to the next question. Consider the following statements. Ethiopia, Somalia, and Israel are littoral states of Red Sea. We know that Ethiopia is not a littoral state, and hence the statement is incorrect. The second one is the Red Sea geographically constitutes a rift valley, which is a correct statement because it is lying in the zone of plate tectonic divergence. Which of the above statements are correct? Answer has to be B, because the second statement alone is correct. Moving to the next question. Analyze the multifaceted impact on India due to the recent escalation in maritime aggression by Houthis in the Red Sea region. For this question, the introduction has to be briefly about the Houthi aggression in this part of the region, and within the body, we can structure the answer in three particular dimensions. One is geopolitical, the second one is economic dimension, and the third one is the security dimension with regard to implications towards India. So the geopolitical implications, we can discuss about the new dilemma that has been created for India, whether to join hands with US or not. Alongside, we can also discuss various issues that we have discussed pertaining to the regional instability in this part of the region, including the attack on ships with Indian crew, which has put pressure on India to make statement on action against the Houthis, even though we know that it is from a friendly nation, that is Yemen. Second, with regard to economic implications, we can bring out the extent of impact on shipping routes and also extent of impact on the transport and communication with regard to the goods which are being sent in the form of consignment to other particular nations in the form of exports, and also with regard to imports. Moreover, this can lead towards an energy insecurity situation for India because much of the energy requirements are fulfilled through this part of the route, because most of the imports from Russia and Saudi Arabia are done through this route. And three, it can also talk about an impact over the Indian diaspora in this region. Having talked about this, we can also look into the security implications, wherein the possibility of direct escalation might occur because of the attacks over these ships, not only against the Houthis, but also against many other such groups which are working in this part of the region. In conclusion, we can highlight the need for quick settlement of this issue by understanding this as an extended theater of Israel-Palestine conflict and India's role that can be ensured in this part of the region and peace within this particular region. Thank you one and all. Please like, share and comment on this video, and please do subscribe to our channel. Thank you.